It is time, everyone, for a 2023 PlayStation Studios portfolio update. Sony has a lot of developers, both internal and external, working on a lot of content for PS5 and also PC as well, so let's run through all of them and see what they're currently working on. Starting off with Bend Studio. Currently, they are working on a new AAA IP based on the open world systems built in Days Gone. That was our last meaningful update back in June of 2021, although we can say Bend did update their logo in June of 2022 for what it's worth, so there's not really much going on here. We still went through that whole song and dance of the April report from Jason Schreier about how they were working on an Uncharted game, and then at some point they were asked to be taken off of it, so no major update here outside of them still working on this new IP based on the open world systems built in Days Gone. As for Bluepoint Games, after shipping Demon's Souls on PS5, we had that whole funny acquisition thing happen where PlayStation Japan initially leaked it on Twitter, then months later it was finally confirmed, and that was back in September of 2021. And that was also when the president of Bluepoint Games, Marco Thrush, confirmed they're working on, quote, original content, and that's how they phrased it, so that's more or less what's still going on here, is that there's actually somewhat of a debate on what original content really means. So some people seem to think that, oh, they're just working on a new IP and that's just how they're phrasing it, but we should be expecting an entirely new game out of them, a brand new property. And some seem to think, and I'm more in this category of, well, they seem like they keep using original content, that wording in a very purposeful manner, which sort of implies that they are doing new content, but it's maybe based on an existing property. So either a sequel, some sort of expansion, but something that's already based on a game that's a game in a game world that's already there. I am more in that camp. That's just how it sounds, but so far that's still all we have for Bluepoint. Probably going to be a little bit longer until we see what they're up to. Moving on to Firesprite, the only officially revealed project from Firesprite currently is Horizon Call of the Mountain, a PSVR 2 launch game being co-developed with Guerrilla Games. But Firesprite is a big studio. So big that they recently relocated to a new 50,000 square foot office space, so they definitely have more in the pipeline. Currently, they're hiring for a narrative project. It's labeled as, and I quote here, a dark, story-driven next-generation narrative adventure with genre-defining goals. This huge, highly ambitious partnership project takes atmosphere, storytelling, player agency, and narrative firmly into groundbreaking territory on next-generation hardware technologies. Now, if we reference the leak list that had internal studios and XDEV projects on there, Firesprite was listed as having a Horizon VR game, which we already know about, and a survival horror game. And the job listings don't necessarily read as horror, but it does say it's a dark, story-driven experience, so it could be that. But this list is also a bit outdated, as it shows Firesprite as an XDEV studio, and Lucid having the Twisted Metal project, codenamed Red Star, which we can also mention. Firesprite is also hiring for a multiplayer action game that is being described as being in the early phase. It's also utilizing Unreal Engine 5 and will feature both vehicular and on-foot combat. This is likely the rumored Twisted Metal project. Back in January of 2022, we had heard this project changed hands from Lucid Games to Firesprite, and so far at least, that's the most that we have on Firesprite. They've had a lot of job listings actually for more projects, like a shooter and also a mobile game. They're forming like a mobile team within Firesprite, something like that. But currently they're not hiring for any of those positions right now, which means they're likely filled or they're not doing them anymore, which is certainly very possible. But right now those are the running theories, the most well-known path that we understand right now for Firesprite and what they're currently doing. Next up is Guerrilla Games. Recently announced is the expansion for Horizon Forbidden West, The Burning Shores. That's coming out April 19th of this year, only for PlayStation 5. This will have Aloy visiting the Los Angeles area to fight a new old world threat. And like we mentioned before, Guerrilla is also co-developing Call of the Mountain in collaboration with Firesprite. And elsewhere, we can also say that it was recently confirmed that Guerrilla has a Horizon online multiplayer project that will apparently feature its own unique stylized look. And if we reference the leak list again with XDEV projects, that was where we also saw a Horizon Zero Dawn PS5 remaster, which is still a rumor, of course, but this may be at Guerrilla Games. Although it wouldn't surprise me if this is something where Guerrilla is either co-developing or they're perhaps overseeing the work done at another studio, as they're also hiring a lot for a division in the company that specifically oversees outsourced projects. So we've got this, and also possibly another Horizon MMO game that's being worked on by NCSoft, but that and the Zero Dawn PS4 remaster are still right now considered rumors. If we move on to Haven Studios, the fairly recent new Montreal-based studio, this one is interesting in that it was formed during the pandemic, and a large part of their initial startup was simply R&D on how to make games and collaborate in the cloud. We even heard back in July of last year that PS4 and PS5 system architect Mark Cerny was involved in their R&D process for this new cloud-based development approach. Having said that, Haven's first game is a PS5 live service title, and not much else is really known outside of it possibly being a more family-friendly or fantasy-based game. But Haven is certainly interesting in that Sony acquired them during their initial, startup phase, so we haven't seen a game out of them just yet. But with Mark Cerny being involved and their new approach to work, something very interesting. It seems like is, being made behind the scenes there, so it's going to be a bit still, but at least with Haven, that's what we know so far with this brand new studio. Developer Housemarque, one of my favorite studios. So Housemarque shipped the Ascension update for Returnal last year in March, and they also confirmed the PC port of Returnal coming sometime this year, and outside of that, we don't really have a clue as to what they're doing. I mean, they're obviously making something new, that much is clear, but as for what it could be, it's probably a new IP. Historically speaking, Housemarque likes to ship a product, do some extra content down the road, and then move on to something else. So if that's anything to go by, then they're probably getting into something new right now. What we can say, though, is that they'll likely continue their ambitious climb of exploring narratives and trying to tie that closely to their very chaotic but really, really fun gameplay. So we should be expecting more of that, and it's going to be a while until we see what that next game is going to be. As for Insomniac Games, we're expecting Spider-Man 2 this year, which is really exciting. It shouldn't be too long until we get more information and a second trailer on this one. And we also know they've got a team working on Marvel's Wolverine, which is going for a darker tone. And that's really about it. That's all we know there, but that game is still a bit further out. And also we know they have an unannounced multiplayer project, and the only thing we've been tipped off on about this is that job listings have described it as having to abide by existing universes with respective IP holders, more or less implying it's a property that Sony doesn't own, which for Insomniac, given what they've done so far, I mean, we can kind of pick up what they're laying down as to what this game is likely going to be. So, it could be a sort of multiplayer tie-in with Spider-Man 2 or Wolverine or something, that is standalone, which nowadays seems to make the most sense, but it could be more in the Marvel universe. That's at least the running theory that makes the most sense based on, again, those prior job listings, which kind of gave it away. London Studio. Historically, London Studio has spent a lot of time utilizing PlayStation peripherals over the years, but with PS5, they're working on a good old-fashioned 2D title. This is a live service co-op title set in a modern fantasy London, which we can see based on this one piece of concept art that we have. And that's really it. That's all we have for London Studio. Another one where it's probably going to be a while until we see more of this game, which is fine, but at least for this studio in particular, that is what's most noteworthy, is that they have a very long history of doing a lot of experimental stuff with PlayStation peripherals, and it's not like they've never done 2D stuff. It's been a while since they've had a more traditional game, so it's going to be actually quite refreshing to see them return to that with this upcoming project. For Media Molecule, they're still deeply involved with their ongoing support for Dreams. There's a lot of original development going on inside the game now, and presumably that's where we're going to see more expansions over time with new tools and perhaps new platforms. Perhaps at some point a PS5 and a PSVR 2 native version is due. PC would also be great, but due to the nature of the game and how complex the creation tools might need to be adapted to PC, that may be more of a massive undertaking. Not entirely sure, that's me kind of saying that off the cuff, but I think at some point it's kind of a natural step to think that PS5, PSVR 2, and I would like to see PC come eventually. Naughty Dog. It shouldn't be too much longer now until we see the new Last of Us multiplayer game. We just saw new concept art, and they'll be sharing more info on that game later this year. As for Naughty Dog's other project, they're not talking. Neil Druckmann recently discussed how the studio is going to avoid formally revealing their games until they're closer to completion. So while we can speculate all day about The Last of Us Part 3 or a new IP, or if they're doing a third game, right? I mean, that's all, good conjecture we could have. But for now, it's going to be a long time until I think we see that next major entry. However, this year we can finally see The Last of Us multiplayer game. Next up is Pixel Opus, and you know what? They might be due fairly soon to show something on their next game. They're working on a new IP for PlayStation 5, and it's in collaboration with Sony Pictures Animation, and given the art style of Entwined and Concrete Genie, and that the studio is growing, this is a studio to not overlook at all. So they might be working on something very special here in terms of perhaps, well, a larger scope, of course, but also just the sort of art style that they're going for. That, I think, is what really intrigues me about what Pixel Opus may be doing next. And it's been, a fair amount of time, so assuming there's no major problems, we might see it sometime this year. Polyphony Digital. The cool thing with this studio is that it was recently confirmed that Gran Turismo 7 is getting a PSVR 2 free day one upgrade when PSVR 2 launches. And what we don't know is exactly how much support there is, but at least we know that's coming. And alongside that, we can expect Polyphony will continue supporting Gran Turismo 7 with regular content updates. That is I think, the safest studio we can look at and say, this is what they're doing. Another mostly predictable studio is San Diego, so we can always count on them to ship a new MLB The Show every year, and now they're shipping on all console platforms. San Diego has absolutely released games that aren't MLB, but as far as we can see, there's no dead giveaways on something coming anytime soon that's not MLB, so for right now at least, if you like baseball, that's what you can expect out of them. Moving on to Santa Monica Studios. So with God of War Ragnarok out, Santa Monica will likely keep doing their post-launch support for that game. Not sure how much more they're going to do, but it would probably be safe to assume they're still working with Jetpack Interactive for the inevitable PC port of Ragnarok as well. But there is also a new IP, an unannounced title coming from Santa Monica that's been in development for, well, even prior to Ragnarok shipping, so that's likely still far away, but still an exciting prospect to think about, to finally see something new out of Santa Monica. And this is also, we assume it is Cory Barlog's game, so at least in terms of the hierarchy of when we should be expecting these games, because it's just been God of War for, decades now at this point, we should be seeing something new, and then maybe another God of War after that. Sucker Punch Productions. So with Sucker Punch, we've had job listings over the past year or two since Tsushima's launch and also the Legends launch that more or less confirms we're getting more Tsushima, as in they're working on a sequel and possibly a sequel to both, so they're hiring for multiplayer as well. It's not entirely clear, but it would be reasonable to suggest that a Tsushima sequel is underway and that Legends might be getting a sort of grander version 2.0 release, and that would again be standalone from the base game, or at least I think from the very onset it will be standalone. So Tsushima had launched first, then Legends came tacked on, but then Legends launched as a standalone product. I think moving forward we should expect a Tsushima sequel, and then whatever version 2 of Legends is will come out separately. For Team Asobi, they're currently working on a new 3D action game, and that was really the last thing that we heard based on a job listing and looking at what they've done previously. It's primarily experimental stuff with the PlayStation camera and PlayStation VR, and more recently we got a traditional but fantastic 3D platformer, Astro's Playroom on PS5, so if it's more of that, I'd be happy. If it's something for PSVR 2, I'd be happy. If anything, the game should be bigger though, because Team Asobi has grown a lot, and the studio director, Nicolas Duché, has said they want their games to feel like they're still made in Japan, so having that sort of quirky but uniquely Japan look and feel. So that's really all we can say on Team Asobi right now, but just based on what they've done prior, I am really just okay with whatever they decide to do next up on PS5. Now that's it for all of Sony's internal studios that actually make their own games, because we've said before that they've got other support teams that we don't necessarily have to mention here, although we can say for PlayStation Studios Visual Arts, we did have the job listings kind of reveal a new team being formed there in some way, where it's in collaboration with Naughty Dog, or Naughty Dog is working closely to oversee that project, and it sounds like it's another Uncharted. So we do have that, but mostly we don't have to mention the support studios. We also now have Bungie sitting alongside PlayStation Studios as an independent entity, and they're going to be helping with live service stuff, but outside of that, they're mostly going to operate independently, shipping and releasing and doing all that outside of exclusive PS5 stuff, obviously. But more broadly speaking, we can also say for PS Studios, they've got the new mobile initiative, which we're not really going to, cover much mobile stuff here, but there's that. They're going to be doing more PC ports, working on the back catalog of PlayStation games. And now we can also move on to XDEV, so external development projects. These are PlayStation Studio games from, studios that Sony does not own, but they will be publishing and owning the IP to these games. And there's also a separate arm for third-party publishing deals where Sony does not own the IP. But in terms of external XDEV projects that are going to be labeled as PS Studio games, we've got the Ballistic Moon Project Bates project that was on the XDEV leak list. It's listed as a survival horror game. We finally had Death Stranding 2 get confirmed. Nice to see. That one's probably coming around sometime in 2024. So at least we have a good release window there. There is the Deviation Games partnership. Not much has happened here just yet. We still don't really know much, so maybe we'll hear something in the next 12 to 18 months. Or rather, 12 to 18 months from now is when we'll hear more about that game. We have Firewall Ultra. That's a PSVR 2 game from First Contact Entertainment. No release date for that game just yet. We have Firewalk Studio. That's a multiplayer game, it's been in development since 2018, so we might see more about that game very soon. There's Helldivers 2, Arrowhead Game Studios. We saw that leak from last year, and it seems like that title was apparently delayed, so it was supposed to launch sometime late last year, so maybe we should be seeing it fairly soon. That is going to be a much bigger budget for what we expect out of Arrowhead, and it's not going to be like an isometric top-down sort of viewpoint. It's going to be a larger AAA third-person game. There's also the XDEV leak that we talked about recently on LTPS. That was with the goopy monster, so going to be a while for that one as well. Sumo Digital was also on the XDEV leak list with Project Carbon. We've seen Sumo get a lot of work from Sony over the years, so here's another one. Also probably going to be a while until we see that one as well. But in terms of third-party publishing, we have Stellar Blade, Rise of the Ronin, Lost Soul Side, Convallaria, and likely more that I'm either overlooking or more so things that we don't know about just yet. So we are going into that peak year for PS5. Year 3, year 4, that's when they sell the most consoles. We've got PSVR 2 launching, an expected hardware revision, and there's just still a lot that we don't know. So it should be a very exciting and busy year for the world of PlayStation. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully you found this useful, and if you haven't just yet, please consider subscribing for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter @MysticRyan, and that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.